In the heart of an American city, 5 privileged Gen Z friends made a choice that would shatter their lives forever. Under the blazing afternoon sun, Ethan, Madison, Lucas, Chloe, and Ryan took hammers to the Virgin Mary statue that had stood in the square for decades. Their arrogance reached its peak when they replaced it with a stuffed toy bear named Labubu, laughing as the crowd gasped in disbelief. But laughter died the moment the sky turned black, thunder roared, and lightning struck the toy, igniting it in a blaze of unnatural fire. The friends fled in terror, believing they had escaped. Yet, when night fell and each returned home, the true punishment began. Shadows whispered, mirrors bled with visions, and invisible hands reached for them. What they unleashed was not just divine anger, it was a judgment none of them could ever outrun. The square did not look like a place where storms were born. It lay open to the late afternoon light, ringed by brick buildings with wrought iron balconies and flagpoles that clinked in a soft breeze. Buskers tuned guitars near the fountain. A vendor pushed a cart that hissed with steam. Pigeons hopped on the warm granite ledges, pecking at pretzel crumbs. At the center stood the statue that had watched over generations, the pale stone figure of the Virgin Mary, with her hands extended, palms open, eyes lifted toward a horizon no one else could quite see. Tourists raised phones. A caretaker swept leaves away from the pedestal, humming to himself. He did not look up when 5 figures crossed the street with the swagger of people who believed the world would bend to them. Ethan led, his sunglasses perched on his head, blonde hair arranged with the precision of a billboard. His shirt had a sharp monogram over the pocket, a private school emblem that was supposed to signal more than fashion. Madison fell into step beside him, the kind of beauty that turned heads and cameras at every party. A glossed precision in every movement, as if she had practiced being watched. Lucas lagged a pace behind, restless, shifting the backpack strap on his shoulder, tapping his knuckles against the zipper. Chloe walked with her gaze forward and chin high, a silent challenge to the square, the statue, the city itself. Ryan brought up the rear, tall, athletic, the easy grin of a captain, a grin that today did not quite reach his eyes. The bag was heavier than Lucas had expected. It thudded when he let it drop onto the base of the statue, and the caretaker finally looked up. The broom paused. He blinked once and took in the strange tableau of 5 wealthy teenagers at the saint's feet, shoes too clean for the scuffed public stones. When the first hammer appeared, he frowned. He lifted a hand as if to speak, then found his voice snagged on something dry and wordless. He set the broom against the pedestal and stepped closer. "Hey," he said, the words soft, almost apologetic. "You cannot do that." Ethan did not answer. He pulled on a pair of black gloves like a performer about to begin a trick. Madison lifted her phone, lenses glinting. She did not record exactly, not yet. She wanted the best angle, the angle that would define what this moment was supposed to mean. Chloe's mouth curved into a smile that did not touch her eyes. Ryan cracked his knuckles. Lucas unzipped the second pocket and revealed a bundle wrapped in tissue, printed with pastel shapes, and the words Labubu in a repeating pattern. "Do not do that," the caretaker said again, louder this time, a tremor under the syllables. "Please." Ethan lifted the hammer. It flashed in the sunday. For a second, he simply held it there, suspended at the apex of a motion he had not yet made. The world conspired to still itself. The busker's cord fell into silence. The vendor paused with his hand on the lever. A pigeon skittered to the edge of the fountain and cocked its head, suspicious. Madison found her angle, set her focus, braced her elbows above the carved base. Ethan's eyes slid over the face of the statue, the carved lids and the delicate stone nose, and the lips that seemed to be whispering words he could not hear. He told himself he felt nothing. He told himself it was ridiculous to feel anything at all. "Do it," Chloe said. The hammer fell, stone chipped, a sound like teeth breaking cracked across the square. The caretaker gasped. He reached forward and grabbed Lucas's sleeve. But Ryan was there in an instant, shoulder turned, not exactly violent, but enough to push the older man back a step. The second strike rang truer. The third split the edge of the cheek and sent a thin spray of white fragments across Ethan's shoes. Madison captured every moment, eyes glittering behind her camera app, not seeing the shards that landed like snow on the backs of her hands. "Stop," the caretaker said. It was not a command, not anymore. It was a prayer. They did not stop. Chunks of stone slid down the robes and clattered to the pedestal. Chips lodged in the folds of the carved fabric and trembled with each impact. Chloe took a hammer herself, testing the weight as if it were an expensive gift, a sleek toy. Lucas removed the bundle and began to peel the tissue paper away. Inside lay a plush bear with bright, stylized eyes and a permanent grin stitched above a small nose, the kind of grin that pretended innocence even as it advertised irony. The fur was bubblegum pink. The tag read, "Labubu," in glossy letters. It was larger than it had seemed in the store, larger than Lucas had imagined when he had first joked about their grand replacement. In his hands now, it felt wrong, a softness that did not belong here. A woman with a stroller noticed, then a man with a grocery bag, then a pair of teenagers who stopped laughing and stared. A circle of attention collected like rain, one drop at a time, until a crowd stood around the base, held back by a strange etiquette that had not yet become intervention. Phones rose, whispers began. What are they doing? Are they filming a show? Is that legal? There is a kind of gravity to audacity. It draws people into its orbit and asks them to admire the boldness of ignoring the consequences. Ethan felt that pull inside his chest like a second heartbeat. He struck again. The statue's face yielded, the nose fell, the lips split. He felt, for a flicker of a second, something under his ribs catch on a hook of panic. He drowned it in motion and sweat and the sensation of being unstoppable, while Madison turned his movements into images that would define him, at least to those he cared to impress. Ryan hauled the broken sections to the side of the pedestal. The caretaker pressed a trembling hand against his heart and said, "You must not. This is consecrated. This is not for you to touch." Chloe leaned close enough to whisper, "Everything is for us to touch." Lucas cleared the last fragments from the center recess with a brush of his arm. He lifted the bear and set it into the hollow, like a grotesque substitution in a ceremony none of them had been taught to respect. The plush sat there with serene stupidity, a pink saint for a plastic age. Someone laughed, a single sharp bark that made others laugh too, not because it was funny, but because laughter can be a shield. The sky dimmed. It was not a cloud rolling over the sun, so much as a decision the afternoon made to end sooner than scheduled. The light pulled its edges inward. The busker looked up first, fingers lifting instinctively to ward off rain. The pigeons scattered to the eaves. A wind threaded through the flags and made them strain. The vendor looked to the west, where the sky had gone, the color of old bruises. Thunder did not yet sound, but there was a taste in the air that made tongues go dry and hands go cold. Ethan glanced up and then away, unwilling to credit coincidence with meaning. Madison stepped backward to widen her frame, catching the bear in the center. Crowds around, fragments like halos of chalk around the base. Chloe reached out and, with a small, theatrical bow, pressed the plush bear's paws together as if in parody of prayer. The first thunderclap rolled across the square like a vow broken in a cathedral. Heads tilted in unison. A second followed, closer, an iron drum hit with a mallet. The caretaker crossed himself and whispered a name he had not said aloud in years. He turned toward the nearest bystander and said, "Call someone." But he did not specify who, because this did not feel like police work or city maintenance or anything else that could be fixed with a phone call and a clipboard. The air grew scented with metal. A woman pulled her child closer. The busker's guitar strings snapped. Rain did not begin. Instead, there was a pause so absolute that for a stretched heartbeat, the entire square seemed to hold its breath. In that stretched space between sound and strike, Lucas felt the hairs on his arms lift. Ryan's grin failed completely. Madison's camera hesitated, a blur as her hand shook. Lightning fell. It did not zigzag from cloud to stone in the romantic pattern of a photograph. It plunged, a column of white fire with edges too bright to look at, a sudden pillar that made the world glare. It found the center of the pedestal. It found the bear. It found the small metal pin in the tag, perhaps, or the coins spilled there by superstition, or merely the exact point of insult that it had been called to punish. The sound was not thunder, but a tearing, a rending of something invisible that separated the safe moment before from the moment after. The bear ignited in a flare that leapt from pink to orange to a white that ate the color out of everything around it. Heat pushed outward in a ring. People screamed. The caretaker stumbled backward and fell, palms scraping stone. Ethan threw an arm across his face and felt a sting as hot air slapped his skin. Madison's phone flashed a warning and then died, screen black. Chloe staggered and caught herself on the base, her palm leaving a smudge of soot on the grey stone. Ryan swore, the sound small and human against the roar. Lucas stood frozen, his hand still out from where he had adjusted the plush paws, his fingertips tingling as though the lightning had passed through his bones to mark him. The bear did not simply burn, it shrank as if the fire were a mouth chewing it, foam collapsing into a blackened core. The stitched grin melted into a sneer, then into nothing. The tag curled and blackened, the glossy letters of Labubu blistering, then flaking into ash. Smoke rose, not grey but a thick, oily black that climbed and then twisted under an invisible finger. It did not disperse. It gathered itself into a column that leaned toward Ethan, then toward Madison, as if scenting each of them, learning them, committing them to memory. "Run," the caretaker said. His voice had found strength in fear. "Run, you fools. Run now." Ethan did not need the command twice. Pride is a costume that comes off quickly when the room catches fire. He grabbed Madison's wrist. The group broke as one, shoes slipping on a scatter of stone chips. They fled the pedestal and shouldered through the shocked ring of onlookers. The crowd parted with an instinctive respect for danger. The vendor ducked behind his cart. The busker ran, holding his guitar to his chest like a child. The storm cracked again, a branch torn from the sky and hurled out of sight. Somewhere a car alarm started and could not figure out how to stop. They spilled into the side street that ran along the square. Rain blew in needle bursts, not a downpour, just enough to sting, just enough to make the air taste like pennies. Ethan did not look back. He did not want to see if the smoke followed, if the statue still burned, if the eyes of the stone, half shattered, were watching him leave. Ryan sprinted beside him, breath harsh, legs pumping. Lucas gasped, lungs tight, an ache blooming under his ribs. Chloe, even in panic, ran with a kind of elegant calculation, choosing the driest line beneath the awnings. Madison clutched her dead phone as if it could protect her from the truth that technology had no jurisdiction where they had just walked. At the corner, Ethan stopped only long enough to orient in the sudden maze of narrow streets. Sirens wailed, not yet near. He pointed left without thinking, and they ran again, past a bakery that had turned its chairs upside down for the night, past a mural of saints and city heroes whose painted eyes seemed to follow their flight, past a man in a doorway who crossed himself and spat. When they finally slowed, it was only because their bodies made them. They collapsed against a wall, slick with the first layer of rain. Ethan's chest soared at the air. Ryan pressed his hands to his knees and shook his head like a horse after a bad jump. Lucas sat on the curb and stared at the tremble in his fingers. Chloe squeezed water from the ends of her hair and tried to pretend her hands did not shake. Madison touched the power button on her phone again and again, as if willing the screen to return with a narrative that made sense. A story where she could select a filter and call it art. "We are fine," Ethan said, and heard the falseness immediately. He did not correct it. He stacked more words on top of it like bricks, hoping the wall would stand. It was a storm. It was timing. No one will trace it. No one will care tomorrow. Someone filmed, Chloe said. So did you, Ryan replied. Madison lifted the phone and stared at the dead glass. It died, she whispered. It died the second the lightning hit. Lucas rubbed his forearm, where the tingling had turned into a dull ache. He could not shake the sense that something had touched him when the column of smoke leaned, something that was not heat, not electricity, but attention. He swallowed and said nothing, because nothing sounded reasonable and everything sounded ridiculous. Sirens grew louder. They broke apart and drifted in different directions with unspoken agreement, dispersing like birds flushed from a tree. Ethan walked quickly, then fast, then ran again, not toward home exactly, but toward distance. Madison slipped into a rideshare with windows tinted dark. Ryan cut through an alley where his sneakers splashed in shallow puddles. Chloe walked as if she had all the time in the world, defying the fear to see if it would obey. Lucas took the long route through streets that looked less familiar with every step, as though the city had shifted a degree to the left while they were not watching. By the time the storm truly arrived, the square was already a scene. Police lights splashed red and blue over the pedestal. Firefighters hosed the last stubborn tongues of flame from the blackened mass that had once been a joke. The caretaker gave a statement, hands shaking despite the blanket around his shoulders. Tourists talked in urgent tones to anyone who would listen. The statue, or what remained of it, stood like a broken witness, the face shattered, the hands charred around the edges of stone that should not have burned. Above, the clouds went on closing until the city seemed to exist under a lid. Far from the noise, 5 doors closed in 5 different neighborhoods. Water dripped from clothes onto entryway tiles. Shoes were kicked off, lights were turned on with small, grateful clicks. The storm moved overhead, and the thunder made the windows tremble in their frames. Each of them drew a breath that felt like survival. Each of them believed the worst had been left in the square. They did not yet know that the storm had learned their names. They did not yet know that attention can follow, and that judgment, once invited, keeps its own calendar. Ethan dropped his keys on the marble counter of his family's kitchen and pulled open the fridge without appetite. He left the lights low, as though shadows could erase the memory of the square. His parents were out of town, as always, their absence a hollow routine he had stopped noticing years ago. Upstairs, the mirrors of his bedroom reflected the storm's residue, streaks of rain, the occasional flash of distant lightning. He peeled off his damp clothes and lay across the mattress, scrolling through his phone in search of distraction. Social media feeds refreshed again and again, but no video of the statue had surfaced. Relief trickled in, warm at first. He was safe. They had been reckless, but the world would forget. Sleep arrived like a trap. His dream was not a dream at all, but a replay of the hammer striking stone. He felt the jolt in his wrist, heard the crack like splintering teeth. The statue's eyes lifted to meet his. They were no longer stone. They were wet, alive, filled with sorrow. He woke with a start, sweat chilling his back. He turned toward the mirror opposite his bed, and in its surface, he did not see himself. He saw the Virgin, her face whole again, her gaze fixed on him. He blinked once, twice, but the reflection did not change. Only when he threw the lamp at the mirror, shattering glass into 1,000 glittering pieces, did her image vanish. Chloe sat cross-legged in her room, earbuds in, music loud enough to vibrate her bones. She had posted a cryptic photo earlier, a blurred shot of rain and neon captioned with one word, "After." Comments flooded in hearts, fire emojis, speculation. She basked in their attention like sunlight. But as the hour grew late, a whisper threaded itself through the bass of her music. At first, she thought it was a line in the song she had never noticed before, a feminine voice repeating words in a language she did not understand. She pulled the earbuds free, and the whisper remained, circling the room, brushing her neck like cold breath. Her lights flickered, The posters on her wall rippled as if disturbed by an invisible hand. The closet door creaked open, though she had locked it earlier. She clutched her phone, the glow illuminating her pale face. In the corner, she thought she saw the outline of folded hands, pale against the dark. The whisper rose into a chorus, dozens of voices chanting, until Chloe screamed and dove beneath her blanket. But blankets could not silence what had been invited into her room. Lucas could not stop rubbing his arm. Since the lightning strike, a dull ache had burrowed under his skin. Now, in the solitude of his room, he rolled up his sleeve and stared. Red lines had appeared, faint at first, then darker, spreading across his forearm. They curved into a shape he did not want to recognize, a cross etched into flesh as if carved by invisible fire. He ran to the bathroom, scrubbing at it under scalding water, but the lines would not fade. They glowed faintly in the dim light, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He gripped the sink and lifted his gaze to the mirror. Behind his reflection, standing in the bathtub, was a figure robed in white, head bowed, eyes hidden in shadow. Lucas spun around. The tub was empty. The curtains swayed as if stirred by breath. His chest tightened until he thought he might collapse. He stumbled back into his bedroom, pulled the sleeve down to hide the mark, and sat awake until dawn, afraid to close his eyes. Ryan drowned his fear in routine. He dropped onto the couch, turned on the television, and scrolled through channels until he found a basketball game. The noise filled the emptiness of his parents' mansion. He convinced himself it had only been a freak storm, a coincidence. He repeated it until the words lost meaning. But then he noticed it, the sensation of weight on his shoulder. He glanced sideways, expecting to see the family dog or a pile of blankets, but nothing was there. Still, the pressure remained. He stood, shrugged his shoulder, rubbed at the muscle. It grew heavier, insistent, as if a charred hand were pressing him down. The television flickered. For a split second, the screen showed not athletes, but a charred figure standing in a square of fire. Ryan staggered backward, knocking over a lamp. His heart hammered against his ribs. He left the television on mute, unwilling to face the silence that seemed hungrier than the noise. Madison sat at her vanity, brushing her hair in long, even strokes. The power outage had reset her phone, and she hated the void of missing footage. She had been ready to post the ultimate rebellion, the perfect scandal. Instead, her screen remained black. She set the brush down and met her own eyes in the mirror. Behind her reflection, faint at first, children stood in a half circle. Their mouths opened, but no sound emerged. She blinked, leaned closer. Their voices finally broke through, soft, melodic, chanting a hymn she had not heard since childhood mass. The sound wrapped around her like a net, tightening. Her chest constricted. She spun to face the room, but it was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the children were gone. Only her reflection remained, pale and trembling, with lips that were not moving in time with her own. Each of them, in separate rooms, believed they were losing their minds. Each told themselves it was fatigue, imagination, residue of adrenaline, but the punishments had only begun. The Virgin had marked them, one by one, and the night was far from over. Ethan dropped his keys on the marble counter of his family's kitchen and pulled open the fridge without appetite. He left the lights low, as though shadows could erase the memory of the square. His parents were out of town, as always, their absence a hollow routine he had stopped noticing years ago. Upstairs, the mirrors of his bedroom reflected the storm's residue, streaks of rain, the occasional flash of distant lightning. He peeled off his damp clothes and lay across the mattress, scrolling through his phone in search of distraction. Social media feeds refreshed again and again, but no video of the statue had surfaced. Relief trickled in, warm at first. He was safe. They had been reckless, but the world would forget. Sleep arrived like a trap. His dream was not a dream at all, but a replay of the hammer striking stone. He felt the jolt in his wrist, heard the crack like splintering teeth. The statue's eyes lifted to meet his. They were no longer stone. They were wet, alive, filled with sorrow. He woke with a start, sweat chilling his back. He turned toward the mirror opposite his bed, and in its surface, he did not see himself. He saw the Virgin, her face whole again, her gaze fixed on him. He blinked once, twice, but the reflection did not change. Only when he threw the lamp at the mirror, shattering glass into 1,000 glittering pieces, did her image vanish. Chloe sat cross-legged in her room, earbuds in, music loud enough to vibrate her bones. She had posted a cryptic photo earlier, a blurred shot of rain and neon captioned with one word, "After." Comments flooded in hearts, fire emojis, speculation. She basked in their attention like sunlight. But as the hour grew late, a whisper threaded itself through the bass of her music. At first, she thought it was a line in the song she had never noticed before, a feminine voice repeating words in a language she did not understand. She pulled the earbuds free, and the whisper remained, circling the room, brushing her neck like cold breath. Her lights flickered. The posters on her wall rippled as if disturbed by an invisible hand. The closet door creaked open, though she had locked it earlier. She clutched her phone, the glow illuminating her pale face. In the corner, she thought she saw the outline of folded hands, pale against the dark. The whisper rose into a chorus, dozens of voices chanting, until Chloe screamed and dove beneath her blanket. But blankets could not silence what had been invited into her room. Lucas could not stop rubbing his arm. Since the lightning strike, a dull ache had burrowed under his skin. Now, in the solitude of his room, he rolled up his sleeve and stared. Red lines had appeared, faint at first, then darker, spreading across his forearm. They curved into a shape he did not want to recognize, a cross etched into flesh as if carved by invisible fire. He ran to the bathroom, scrubbing at it under scalding water, but the lines would not fade. They glowed faintly in the dim light, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He gripped the sink and lifted his gaze to the mirror. Behind his reflection, standing in the bathtub, was a figure robed in white, head bowed, eyes hidden in shadow. Lucas spun around. The tub was empty. The curtains swayed as if stirred by breath. His chest tightened until he thought he might collapse. He stumbled back into his bedroom, pulled the sleeve down to hide the mark, and sat awake until dawn, afraid to close his eyes. Ryan drowned his fear in routine. He dropped onto the couch, turned on the television, and scrolled through channels until he found a basketball game. The noise filled the emptiness of his parents' mansion. He convinced himself it had only been a freak storm, a coincidence. He repeated it until the words lost meaning. But then he noticed it, the sensation of weight on his shoulder. He glanced sideways, expecting to see the family dog or a pile of blankets, but nothing was there. Still, the pressure remained. He stood, shrugged his shoulder, rubbed at the muscle. It grew heavier, insistent, as if a charred hand were pressing him down. The television flickered. For a split second, the screen showed not athletes, but a charred figure standing in a square of fire. Ryan staggered backward, knocking over a lamp. His heart hammered against his ribs. He left the television on mute, unwilling to face the silence that seemed hungrier than the noise. Madison sat at her vanity, brushing her hair in long, even strokes. The power outage had reset her phone, and she hated the void of missing footage. She had been ready to post the ultimate rebellion, the perfect scandal. Instead, her screen remained black. She set the brush down and met her own eyes in the mirror. Behind her reflection, faint at first, children stood in a half circle. Their mouths opened, but no sound emerged. She blinked, leaned closer. By the fourth night, fear had bled into desperation. Sleep came in fragments, broken by visions of fire, blood, and prayers twisted into curses. None of the five could bear the weight alone anymore. One by one, they returned to the group chat, hesitant at first, then pouring out confessions. Ethan, it is not just me, she is in my house. Chloe, voices everywhere, my phone burned. Lucas, there is a cross on my arm, it is inside me now. Ryan, Hands, they do not leave me alone. And Madison, children, every night, and her, she is here. A silence followed, heavier than words. Then Ethan typed, "We meet, tonight, the square." The city was restless beneath another storm. Thunder rolled across rooftops as if the heavens were beating war drums. At midnight, the five converged on the square. Their footsteps echoed on wet pavement, their faces pale, drawn thin by sleepless nights. None of them looked at the statue immediately. They could not. The caretaker was gone, the vendors gone, the tourists gone. The square stood abandoned, yet not empty. At the pedestal, the remains of the plush bear still clung to the stone, a blackened husk, its grin melted into a grotesque sneer. Lightning revealed it in flashes, and in each flash, its form shifted. Sometimes it looked like fabric, other times it looked like flesh, seared and blistered. "We end it here," Ethan said, though his voice trembled. "End what?" Chloe whispered. "Do you even know what we started?" Lucas pulled up his sleeve. The cross on his arm glowed with unnatural light, veins of fire spreading from it. "She marked us. This will not stop until she decides it does." Ryan kicked a fragment of stone across the square. "Then we make her listen." Madison shook her head violently. "You do not make her do anything. She is already here." The storm confirmed her words. Lightning forked across the sky, striking so close the ground quivered beneath their shoes. The burned bear shuddered, releasing a plume of smoke that coiled into the shape of a woman draped in robes. For a moment, her face was hidden. Then, in the next flash of lightning, the Virgin appeared in the smoke eyes hollow, tears black, hands outstretched, not in blessing but in judgment. The five staggered back. Ethan raised his hammer again, the same one he had carried that first day, though he did not remember bringing it. His knuckles whitened. "We fight," is not feasing. But when he swung, his hammer met nothing. The smoke dissolved and reformed behind him. The Virgin's voice rolled over the square, low and resonant, layered like the voices of 1,000 choirs chanting in grief. "You broke what was sacred. You replaced faith with mockery. Now, I will show you truth." Each of them was seized by a vision. Ethan stood once more in the church, but now every pew was filled with stone figures of himself. Hundreds of Ethans sat in silence, each with a hammer in hand, each striking the Virgin in endless repetition. Blood poured from the altar, flooding the floor. He tried to scream, but his throat filled with shards of broken glass. Chloe was back in her locked room, only this time the voices were not whispers, they were shrieks. The posters on her wall bled, faces of celebrities she once worshipped, twisting into demons. Her phone screen showed her own face, but older, rotted, hollow-eyed, laughing at her terror. Lucas knelt in the cathedral of his vision again. The bell tolled, and with each toll, pieces of his skin peeled away, falling like ash to the floor. Beneath the skin was not muscle but stone, carved with crosses, until he was nothing but a statue frozen, unable to move, a permanent witness to his own undoing. Ryan found himself on the field again, only now thousands of charred hands burst from the turf, grabbing his legs, chest, throat. They pulled him down into the earth. He clawed at the air, but each breath filled with soil. Above him, the sky blazed with burning eyes, watching in silence. Madison lay in her bed, surrounded by children. They no longer sang hymns. They screamed accusations, voices sharp as knives, vain, empty, idle. They clawed at her skin with small hands, leaving scratches that burned like fire. When she begged them to stop, the Virgin appeared at the foot of her bed, silent, her shadow stretching across Madison until it swallowed her whole. In the square, their bodies writhed. To onlookers, if there had been any, they might have seemed like 5 teenagers convulsing in the rain, but inside their visions, the torment was absolute. Lightning struck the pedestal again, splitting stone and scattering fragments across the ground. The Virgin's voice rose above the storm. "Repentance is not a word, it is a wound. And wounds demand blood." Ethan dropped to his knees, sobbing. Chloe clawed at her face, leaving streaks of red. Lucas screamed until his voice broke. Ryan pounded the ground with his fists, skin splitting. Madison collapsed entirely, whispering prayers she had not spoken since childhood, her voice trembling, incoherent. Then, as suddenly as it began, the visions ended. They were left gasping in the square, drenched, broken, eyes wide with terror. The smoke receded into the blackened bear, which now resembled nothing human, nothing divine, just a husk, waiting. The storm raged on, but inside each of them, silence reigned, heavy and final. They knew the Virgin had not finished. She had only begun. The storm lingered above the city, as if unwilling to leave, black clouds roiling, thunder muttering like an angry god. In the square, 5 young figures knelt in the rain, shaking, their clothes plastered to their skin, their hearts pounding against cages of bone. They had seen enough to know there would be no return to normal. The Virgin had marked them, judged them, and now the final reckoning hovered near. Ethan was the first to rise. His hammer lay forgotten on the wet stones. He staggered toward the pedestal, soaked hair clinging to his forehead. His eyes were wild, but there was a flicker of resolve. "This ends now," he whispered. "I will not be her prisoner." But as he reached for the charred bear, lightning split the sky, striking the pedestal once more. The shockwave threw him backward, his body slamming against the pavement. He groaned, clutching his chest, while the others scrambled to their feet. The smoke thickened, swirling into a vortex above the pedestal. Within it, the Virgin's figure appeared again, taller, clearer, her robes billowing in a wind that none of them could feel. Her face was both beautiful and terrible, a portrait of sorrow etched into eternal stone. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yet her gaze burned with fury. "You desecrated the sacred," she intoned, her voice layered with countless echoes. "You replaced devotion with vanity. You mocked what was eternal. Now you will stand before truth." The ground cracked beneath their feet. A circle of light flared outward from the pedestal, and before they could move, the 5 were pulled into it, sucked as if gravity itself had turned inside out. They fell, screaming, into blinding white. When their vision cleared, they were no longer in the square. They stood in a vast expanse of nothingness, a horizonless plain of pale light. Above them hung a sky without stars, endless and suffocating. Before them rose a throne of stone, and upon it sat the Virgin, no longer smoke, no longer statue, but flesh and spirit. Her presence overwhelming, her hands rested on her knees, palms open, eyes glowing with divine fire. Around them appeared visions of their pasts, scenes replayed in brutal detail. Ethan watched himself sneering at classmates, swinging privilege like a weapon. He saw the lies he had told, the betrayals he had shrugged away. For every smirk, every cruel word, the Virgin's tears flowed faster. Chloe watched herself staging photos, using people like props, discarding friendships as soon as the likes dwindled. The whispers she had once craved turned now into accusations, each one echoing, empty, hollow, false. Lucas saw his own cowardice laid bare every time he had hidden behind others, every time he had followed blindly into destruction. The mark on his arm blazed brighter, branding him not with faith, but with weakness. Ryan relived his arrogance on the field, his hunger for victory at any cost, the way he had trampled others for applause. Now, the invisible hands that once clapped for him turned black and dragged him downward. Madison trembled as the children appeared again, not ghosts this time, but fragments of her own vanity, innocence twisted by obsession with image, by mirrors and approval. They wept, and their tears burned her skin. The Virgin rose from her throne, her voice shook the void. "Only one among you will walk away, the rest will fall into silence." They fell to their knees, begging, bargaining, screaming. Ethan promised to rebuild the statue. Chloe swore she would devote her life to charity. Lucas begged for mercy, tears streaming. Ryan roared in defiance, declaring he would never bow. Madison, shaking, whispered only 2 words, I am sorry." The Virgin turned her gaze upon each of them. Ethan's hammer appeared in his hand and crumbled into dust. Chloe's phone materialized, screen cracked before dissolving. Lucas's arm split open, stone spilling from within until he collapsed into rubble. Ryan was seized by 1,000 burning hands that dragged him screaming into the lightless ground. Only Madison remained, sobbing, her hands clasped together, not in vanity, not in performance, but in desperation. The Virgin stepped forward. Her fingers brushed Madison's forehead. The storm in the void ceased. Silence reigned. "You are not pure," the Virgin said softly, "but you are broken, and in brokenness lies the chance for repentance." This se grew vir. With a sweep of her hand, Madison was cast backward, through the void, through the circle of light, back into the square. She woke alone on the wet pavement. The storm was gone. The sky above was clear, filled with stars that looked sharper than she had ever noticed. The pedestal stood empty. The bear was gone. The statue was gone. The smoke was gone. Beside her, the streets were quiet. No sign of Ethan, Lucas, Ryan, or Chloe remained. No belongings, no footprints, as if they had never existed at all. Madison staggered to her feet, her body shaking. She looked at her reflection in the fountain's dark water. Her face was pale, her eyes haunted, but she was alive. A whisper brushed her ear, not a threat, not a curse, but a warning. Remember, she left the square in silence. For weeks, Madison wandered the city in a daze. People asked about her friends, but their names slipped from memory. Photos vanished from phones, yearbooks blurred, social media wiped clean. It was as though the Virgin had erased them from history itself. Only Madison carried the truth, the unbearable weight of survival. At night, she still heard the children's voices, softer now, singing hymns she barely remembered. She never touched a mirror again. She never dared step near the square. But every church she passed, every statue she glimpsed, every candle flickering in the dark made her bow her head in trembling silence. The Virgin had spared her, but mercy was not freedom. Mercy was a life lived under the shadow of judgment, a constant reminder that the sacred could never be mocked without consequence. And so Madison lived on alone, haunted, carrying the burden of a story no one else would ever believe. The others were gone. The square was silent. And above the city, the stars shone cold, eternal, watching.